Other-Terrestrial, Season 1, Episode 2, Vitriol, by Nolan Conray.
Computers now have primary control.
The governor's office was even messier than the last time Brooks had been in here. It seemed as if the men had been tearing the place apart to look for something. Brooks decided to give him a little more to chew on. "I took the liberty of making a hard copy of my report so far on your colony," he said. He threw the folder towards the man's desk. It rebounded and floated towards the governor, who caught it in a limp grip. "It does not read well, Governor." The man looked pale. His brow had sweat on it, and he said nothing, his eyes only flicking from the report back to Brooks. "You have engaged in unethical cloning that have resulted in the deaths and maiming of potentially thousands of sapient beings. You have attempted to kill 2 of my officers. You attempted to bargain a woman's life based on trumped-up charges to coerce me into assisting you in dominating this system," he continued. "And then you attempted to destroy my vessel and crew." Brooks crossed his arms. "Your plans will not achieve anything. I am not afraid of you or your people, Governor. Do you believe you outnumber us because we are only 20 and you have 30,000? He shook his head. "You forget that we come from societies of hundreds of trillions. This is why we come in peace. It's not out of weakness, Governor, but out of strength. We will not attack you, no. Even if you slaughtered all of us here, we would not strike back for revenge. But we would strike back by cutting off trade, and it would be the end of you. No cannons or ships required. Would you rather us work with you or your successor?" The man continued to say nothing. With a shaking hand, he reached out to take the report. For a moment, it seemed that he would open it to read, but instead he just set it aside carefully. "You seem certain they'll get your report," the man mumbled. But there was no threat in his voice. If anything, he sounded terrified, as if he, too, felt certain it would happen. "They will. We have many methods of communication, and soon my ship will be here. My security chief is in command, and she is not a woman to cross, and will have one of the most powerful ships in the void under her command." The governor looked down, covering his forehead. "It was never supposed to go like this," he said softly. "I never intended for your people to get hurt. You have to understand that, Captain." Brooks said nothing, merely watching the man. "You are not the only ones with interest here," the man continued. "I do not know who they were, but I was approached 3 years ago by Hawk Rem. He was an outsider. He represented a group that wished to help us and offered very favorable rates on the cloning equipment." The man finally lifted his head. "But I didn't know how far they'd go. I have tried to find for years who these people were, but all of my inquiries have ended in my people dead. I realized that they would eventually kill me too. But this was not about helping me, but about getting a foothold in the system. About putting me in their debt. Brooks hid his shock at this revelation. Pieces began to fall together in his mind. The cloning seemed poised to solve all of our problems. We didn't have to take in outsiders. We could grow in numbers, even without a viable population. But it didn't go well. Your people saw our clones. These are stunted, dead things. I have not slept well since I first laid eyes upon them. Yet what can I do? Euthanize them before they even had a chance to wake up? He turned and spat to the floor in a way that seemed almost superstitious. We're, to a man, cursed for what we've done. But I knew there was no way out, at least not until I learned that your people want seers. I made sure that when she got exiled from Vitriol, because she's not the first, and they always end up exiled, that she didn't end up in the dark, but here. I knew someone would come looking for her, and I made sure the story spread. Then all that was left was to keep her from being murdered. The man smiled his unpleasant smile again, but it was hollow, forced. I admit it, I hate her. I look at her and remember every terrible thing I've done, and I don't think it's even her fault. But she makes me feel it all the same. I half wish she'd been spaced just so I didn't have to be reminded. Brooks spoke. So you were desperate for us to come and save you from your unknown partners? Yes, the governor said. I didn't want all my skeletons to come trotting out of the closet, but I knew that this place was dirty and you'd never miss it. So I planned to lead your officers astray and threaten them. Then I'd come in and be the hero by leading them to safety. I'd show you that even though this place was dirty, that I wanted it to be cleaner. I'd play the provincial fool trying to muscle you, and then reform before anything happened that put me in the heat. The man's hands clenched, his muscles straining. Rage burned across his face, and his pale skin turned pink. But I trusted Hakrem, and he put me in screws. Had his men try to kill your people. Led them to my dirty secret. He wanted you to learn about the clones, wanted to kill your people, and then to blow up your ship. He counted on you still getting word out, I think, because he wanted to put us in a position where we'd have to go deeper with whoever owns him. The rage faded, and the man appeared to be a shadow of his former self, a broken doll. He was playing us all for patsies, so that I would have no choice. But we didn't die, Brooks commented. Where is Hakrem now? The governor shrugged helplessly. I have never been able to track the man. There are over 200 external ports that I know of on this rock, Captain Brooks, and dozens more that are little more than crude airlocks that I know nothing about. The man always disappeared and reappeared without me knowing how, and he's disappeared again. I doubt we will ever find him. Brooks said nothing, but he knew he would find the man. The governor raised his hands to Brooks, his motion pleading. I surrender to you, Captain Mayor. I have no other choice. Brooks reached out and pushed the man's hands down. You are not my prisoner, Governor. You have breached interstellar law, and there will be repercussions. But I do not wish to lead you out in chains. I wish to save your colony. The expressions that went across the governor's face were confused, terrified, elated. Every emotion seemed to pass over his features, but they finally settled on bewilderment. The captain continued to speak. Your colony is dying, Governor. Most of your people have no part in your crimes. So while I will not be your partner in making this colony dominate the star system, I will be helping your people to survive and lead the best lives they can. He gestured around himself, to the walls, and to encompass the whole station. Your infrastructure is minimal and failing. Your people are sick. What equipment you have is old and in poor repair. These are things that we can fix when the Craton arrives. When she does, we will have the technical crew to make this station as livable as possible. You will take over? The governor asked. There was wariness in his tone, though he knew he could not actually stop any attempt to seize control of his colony. We will work with your local leadership, including you to some degree, to help you run this place in a way that will allow you to attract new colonists. Or, if your people prefer, they may leave with us. Brooks grabbed the back of the chair and pulled himself forward in the zero-G. My goal, Governor, isn't power. It's for your people to have the dignity that sapient beings deserve. The governor looked down. If it was out of shame, sorrow, or defeat, Brooks couldn't know. He said nothing and only gave a nod. The Craton arrived 36 hours after my initial contact with them. Commander Yapanaya was relieved that the situation was under control, but expressed strong concern about the deaths that nearly occurred. I have a feeling that next time we leave the Craton, she will insist on being among my team. Chief Science Officer Sens seems to be recovering well, thanks to Lieutenant Pierre's bravery and Ambassador Kell's intervention. He will take some time to recover fully, but all of his numbers seem to have survived, aside from those killed in the initial shot that pierced his water suit. Our Chief of Engineering, Cutter, and his crew of nearly 1,000 beetle slugs are now pouring over the station. The number of improvements he says he can make to its safety and efficiency are uncountable, even with just the resources in the colony itself. A great number of small improvements can have a vast positive effect when added together. There has been some hostility from the populace, but it has begun quickly to fade as we have begun providing medical clinics to the sick and food for the hungry. Our long-term results will hopefully cement this positive feeling in the minds of the colonists of New Vitriol. Governor Teed has resigned his position. Under our observation, a provisional government made up of the section chiefs and business owners has come together to fill the void. We will watch them carefully to make sure their class interests do not come to dominate and harm the rest of the population. Within a few years, we should be able to help them move into a higher form of economy. Over 700 people have expressed an interest in leaving the colony, though we have already begun to receive reports from the Colonial Assistance Council that they have over 20,000 of their helpers ready to come and get the place back on its feet. When trouble appears, look for the helpers, they say. Without Hoc Rem, any organized resistance to our presence has failed to materialize. It seems that many of his guards were mercenaries he hired, and without prospect of being paid for the effort, they had no desire to resist. The man himself has disappeared, as Teed predicted. We can find no witness that even admits to seeing him on that last day, and as the former governor said, there are many places he could have left from. A signal was sent from the station that day that we believe might have been him communicating with his unknown patrons, but the trail is cold. With just an environment suit and a small craft, he could have already met with a larger vessel and escaped the system. Now, all that remains is to do our best for the cloned human beings that the former governor had been growing. Only 40% will likely survive, and with great health problems. We will do our best for them. And besides them, we have a new member of our crew to acclimate. I predict this may be a difficult adjustment for Apollonia Nor. Madam, I would like to offer you my apologies, Kell said. The old woman glared at him. Her lips were curled into a sneer. I don't want them, she spat. Very well. Kell turned to walk away. Wait, Kell. Early looked to the woman. Madam, I know you're not happy to see us, but I hope that soon you'll feel differently. My friend here, despite his mannerisms, is truly sorry, but he's from a very isolated society that has very different norms than ours. I assure you that he means what he says. His people do not lie. The old woman's face might have changed slightly, but she finally nodded. If it'll get you to stop darkening my doorstep, then fine. Kell had been watching Early curiously as he spoke, but he again now looked to the old woman. What I said to you before was hurtful and shocking to you. That was not my intention, and I apologize for that. My people often do not consider other beings, and it is something I would like to change. The woman stared at him for a long moment. You said my fluffs were fake too. You should apologize for that. Kell's eyebrows arched and he smiled slightly. For once, Early thought, it was not a disturbing smile, but a slightly wry one. To be fair about that, madam, you were trying to trick my friend here. But I do not think you even need to pretend that they are living. They are, on their own merits, quite appealing. Kell reached into the open top of the box and picked up one of the fluffs, a green one. It writhed until he put it on his hand where it calmed. He began to stroke it, and it let out a soft coo. They behave much like a real animal would to a human, Kel said. Early almost snorted a breath, half out of amusement and horror. Like a human? The old woman asked. Strange culture, Early said to her, hoping to kill the subject. But I agree with the ambassador. I could tell they weren't alive, but that also means that my daughters don't have to watch them grow old and die. As important a lesson as that is, I think we could all stand to have a little less such pain in our life, don't you think? Something seemed to crack in the old woman's face. Her suspicious, angry expression evaporated, and she suddenly was just a woman. Aged, tired, but hopeful. Yes, she agreed. Kel put his trade card down onto the old woman's reader. It pinged, and he turned to leave with his green fluff. Early bought two, and set down a white card in front of the woman before gesturing to the large medical tent that the staff of the Craton had set up. If you go over there with this card, Dr. Y will have a look at you. He is one of the top experts in the galaxy on treating human medical conditions, and I trust him more than any other doctor I have ever known. I am certain that he can help you. The old woman said nothing, and Early moved away, pushing hard to catch up with Kel, who was still holding his fluff. You didn't have to buy one, he noted, but it was kind of you. It is a novelty, Kel replied. It is only an object, but it creates a facsimile of being happy when I touch it. Actually, it's true. She did a really good job of making and programming these with what she had to work with. Kel did not reply as he and Early went back into the ship. How are you feeling, Commander? Pyrrha smiled to Sens as he moved the arms of his new suit. It fits well, he said, his screen offering a smile. It looked forced. But with respect, sir, that's not how you feel, Pyrrha added. He looked to her, at least the eyes on his screen did. I did ask you to just call me Sens, Pyrrha. She could tell the being was joking with her, and she nodded. We are on duty, but if you insist I drop rank, I will. At least for now. The coral accepted that and stood up slowly. It is odd. When I took off the suit, I had forgotten just how confining it was. I dare say I enjoyed being out of it. Until I was shot, at least. Pyrrha remained silent as Sens continued to flex in his suit, testing its limits. It was not a substantially different design, but she could not know just how it felt on him. He was, after all, a collection of many beings. I shall miss those 13 that died, he said. His voice was softer, but his screen apparently did not know how to interpret his sadness, flickering from neutrality to a frown and back. I apologize, Sens, that I let that happen. You could have gotten away, but you went back to help me. You did no less for me. I do not blame you, Pyrrha, and you should not blame yourself. I am just sad that... His screen looked to her. Each and every one that makes up me is unique, like every member of this crew. In a sense, I am my own ship, and I suffered losses recently. Will their absence cause you any difficulties? She asked. Like, will it lower my intelligence? No. In fact, a great number of my polyps remained on the ship. Some of us rotate out on a daily basis. Those that were not interested in seeing new Vitriol stayed behind. He flexed his hands. They moved as smoothly as those of a human. Friends said goodbye to friends in their own way, but they did not know it was a final farewell. It was a feeling Pyrrha had known as well. An emergency response. Sometimes people did not come home. A heavy thunking from the hall outside the med bay of the Craton drew their attention. This medical bay was just outside the main hangar, convenient for loading accidents or boarding wounded. They're still taking the cloning tubes on? Sens asked. Nearly done. We've taken on every one that is in a condition to be moved, Pyrrha explained. Sens nodded. When they searched the room, did they find your singing stone? Pyrrha was surprised he remembered. His declarations near the end, lamenting that she had thrown it, she had taken them to be something like the delirious ramblings of a dying man. I gave it a search, but I didn't find it, she admitted. Really? Sens shook his head. Where could it have gone? There were signs that the room was cleaned. The bodies of the dead guards were gone by the time we got to the room, and a lot of the data systems were destroyed. Presumably to keep us from learning anything important. She looked away, unsure what else to say. And evidently that meant destroying your singing stone. I am sorry, Pyrrha. It's not your fault, and you shouldn't blame yourself, she replied. Ah, Sen said, a soft smile on his screen. I'm getting my own medicine. I regret saying it already. A silence fell between them, and Sens was watching her thoughtfully. You seem as if something is weighing upon you, Pyrrha. I suppose I am, but it's small in comparison to your lost Sens. Perhaps, but that does not make it invalid. What is on your mind? Humans are not very spiritual, are they? She asked. No, Sens agreed, looking surprised by the comment. They do not tend to be nowadays. I understand religion still exists among some, but it accounts for only about 2% of the population of the Sol system and most major colonies. Sadly, the data is unknown for their minor colonies. Pierre began to pace slowly. They had their religious wars, persecutions. I've read about them, vaguely. She looked up to Sens. From my understanding, it is a very common phase for many species, Sens said. But I am glad that mine did not have such things. We rarely had conflict. It did occur, of course, but we never had anything even approaching what might be called a war. At least, he trailed off, until we became spacefaring. Pyrrha nodded. That wasn't ancient history. The Sapient Union had been involved in a few wars, and being old members of it, Sens's people had naturally been drawn in as well. But those wars had not been by their instigation, and peace had come, and held. At least so far. Have your people ever had any religion? She asked. Yes and no. We never had the concept of gods or an afterlife, but we had concepts that might be considered spiritual. Sens's voice had a softness to it. Pyrrha wondered if she was prying. Though friendly to a fault, Sens was rarely open about his people, and much about them remained somewhat mysterious. For example, a very common thought is that there is a spiritual connection between all of our people, as like individual polyps in each group, the coral continued. Since we have met other species, some have even gone so far as to suggest that all life is connected, even if we do not realize it. From my kind to humans to Desai. His screen smiled, but it was sad. Even as far as to Aina and Lataran, who taught my people what war was. 20 of their colonies annihilated by the Aina, she knew. Unarmed, harmless, and systems that most beings found little value in. The death toll had been total. Against the Lataran there had been no similar mass loss of life for his people, except among those who had volunteered to serve and died in the line of duty. It had been another bloody war, even if not as destructive as it had been against the Aina. It put her own concerns into a new light, and she felt guilt. She had been regretting her loss, but it was only a stone. It represented more, but at the end of the day, it was just an object. Your loss is very real, Pyrrha, Sen said. She gasped and looked up. Had she said something out loud? Sens's face was smiling gently. Apologies for startling you. Humans may not read you very well, but I am better at it than they. Were you feeling guilty? I was, she admitted. I didn't know it was so obvious. Maybe she exaggerated her mannerisms for Alexander's benefit and didn't realize it. Are you Hapa? He asked. Yes, she admitted. I was born long after our way of life was gone, but I always felt a connection to it. Even after 900 years, they couldn't destroy everything about us. Her hands closed into a fist. It had only been classic imperialism. Her people, conquered, their way of life exterminated, their language and culture driven to extinction. No one left even spoke their language, not natively. It had been dead for over 200 years. Even most of the artifacts gone or destroyed. Everything had just moved on, but the stone had been passed down to her. And now she lost even that. Pyrrha, do you... Sens began, reaching for her. She cut him off. Were the people of the system truly oppressed in the Sol system? She asked. Sens pulled his hand back, his face surprised. Ah, well, I am not an expert on their history, Pyrrha, but I have looked at their public history and compared it to those from Earth. He shook his head. Their grievances were not reasonable. They wanted the law to bend to the decrees of their prophet, and when that did not happen, they considered it to be oppression. And their prophet is believed to have conceived of his plan to leave the Sol system due to crimes he had committed. By the time they caught up with him, he and his followers had gone. Sen shook his head. Sometimes there is oppression, and sometimes beings believe they are being oppressed, simply because they don't get their way. Pyrrha closed her hands into fists. When people don't know the real thing, they think an inconvenience is the worst. It's true. To be honest, I know many of my own kind who think a scratch on the polyp is the end of the... The sound of panicked shouting came from outside the door. Both of them snapped their gaze up. Footsteps thundered by as many people moved in a panic. Stay here, Pyrrha said. I'll see what's up. Unfortunately, I must. I'm not fully stable, Sons replied. Pyrrha rushed out into the hall. She saw crew members and civilians running, but when she caught sight of a security officer, she began to follow him. What's happening? She asked quickly. Shots in the colony, the man replied. Someone is reportedly hit. We're securing the boarding dock. Nodding, Pyrrha ran on. Coming to the great airlock doors that opened into New Vitriol, she saw a crowd gathered. Many of the people out there were in SU uniforms, and she felt a queasy sensation in her stomach. She sprinted as fast as she could in the artificial gravity of the Craton, then leaped into the zero-G of the colony. I'm a responder, she shouted. Let me through. Blood spilled from the man's mouth. The area around his lips were already entirely red, and the man looked to Brooks with desperate eyes. Pyrrha appeared, scanner in hand. She put her hands on the wound in the man's stomach, attempting to staunch the bleeding. But Brooks didn't even need her to give him a shake of her head to know that there was no helping neck Teed. Brooks propped him up. He did not think Teed was a good or honest man, but nonetheless, he did not deserve to die bloody like this. The man's hand flailed upwards, searching for Brooks. The captain gave it to him, and the man hung to him desperately. Don't try to talk, Brooks said. We have medical teams on their way. The man shook his head, spitting more blood. This amount had to be a splitter round. Smart bullets used only in the wild territories by megafauna hunters that shattered in ways designed to cause the most damage to the most important organs. Rem! The man got out. It was barely audible over his choking. He was fading rapidly. Even if they got the medical team here, there was no surviving this kind of wound without the most intensive of care literally on hand. And even then, it was unlikely. The man's grip went slack, and his eyes rolled back in his head. We've caught the culprit, sir, a security officer said, panting as he came up. It was a drone. Already blinked itself. We've got it for scanning all the same. Brooks did not look up from neck Teed until the life was fully gone from his eyes. Lowering the man's body to the floor, he stood up. His uniform was covered in the man's blood. Keep searching in case there was a controller, Brooks said. Set up anti-drone defenses just in case someone else is targeted. Yes, sir. For that reason, Commander Yapanaya is asking you to come back aboard the Craton. Brooks nodded and moved to follow the security officer. Pyrrha saw that he was looking down at his hand. It was clenched around something. What is it, sir? She asked, standing up. Blood had gotten on her wing drapes, but she could clean them later. The captain opened his hand briefly. In it, he was holding a data capsule. The governor's parting gift, he said. This is Nolan Conray. If you've listened this far, thanks very much for your support. Just listening, liking, following, all of that helps a lot. If you want to help more, be sure to check out the Patreon page. I'm adding more content soon. It's been a little slow, but it's been a bit of a hectic time getting everything going. I promise there will be more content coming, and more stories. Episode 3 is well in the works, and the first part should be posted within a few weeks. Now, next week, there is an epilogue post on the blog. I'm not going to be making an audio version of that, just because the audio versions take a lot of time and effort. Perhaps eventually, if there's enough interest in it, I'll do that. But be sure to go check it out for a little more information about Apollonia Nor's first day on the Craton. All right, and that's it. Thank you again,